please tell me your name and spell it as you'd like it to appear.
My name is Violetta Sharps Jones. Violetta, Violetta Jones.
Right. Violetta, tell me a little bit about your work with genealogy.
Wow, I started on this journey in 1990, sadly after the death of my mom. And when I was gathering up my thoughts for the family paper, I realized that I knew a lot more about my mom's family than my dad. And it was my dad that was left here. So I figured, well, I need to start looking into his records. Fortunately, I was raised in the community that my mother was born into. So I did have a lot of friends and relatives, so I knew a lot of that history. And then when I started looking at my dad, which in my lifetime, even though he had 4 siblings, I only knew 2 of those siblings. So I just started on the journey of doing the genealogy. And of course, you know how genealogy has changed, where you have more access to everything now because of the wonderful internet and stuff like that. So I've been able to do quite a bit on all sides of my family now. So now it's an obsession.
Absolutely. What have been some of the more, I don't know, rewarding discoveries you've made?
Wow. There have been many of them. On my mom's side, even though I thought I knew so much, I never even realized that I didn't know how did they get to this community. Where did they come from and who were the first to come there? So growing up in a neighborhood where you knew most of the people, all the people, and there were a lot of people that I referred to as cousins, but no one bothered to tell me how they were my cousins. And for most of us, if it's not your parents' siblings' children, or some of us are fortunate to know our grandparents and their siblings' children, and we recognize that they're cousins, but often we don't have that. So for me, the number one driving thing was that I was a little child that lived in this neighborhood where it was filled with many people that were related to each other in the households. I did not have that. I knew no grandparent on my dad's side or my mom's side. So that was the motivator for me. And then fast forward years later when I started looking more into my dad's side and realizing the connection that they had coming from Caroline County, Virginia to Washington, D.C. around 1860s, and then migrating to Bladensburg, Maryland, which is where they kind of settled. And their connections with the Plummer family, their connections with, of course, Harmony Cemetery and things like that. So I've made many discoveries, and some of them are sad when you discover that you had a great aunt that lived in Washington, D.C. and lived to be 99 years old, and I had never heard her name before. And it makes you wonder, well, what happened? Why didn't I know her? But I do this all for my children and my grandchildren and those that'll come behind, because they will be able to look at the documents that I have in the book that I hope to write, finish someday, to show them so that they will have a copy of that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
About, if you could, Columbia Harmony Cemetery, what we know happened there, and how that relates somewhat to some of your family.
Yeah. It was fairly early in my collecting of information on particularly my dad's maternal side. His mother was Viola Edith Red Sharps. So it's the Reds, R-E-D-D, that migrated from Caroline County that first I discovered the connections to Harmony Cemetery. And as I started gathering more records, I said, wow, they really liked Harmony Cemetery. And I even remember as a little girl going to Harmony Cemetery, the new Harmony Cemetery in the 60s, not necessarily making a connection to the history that I know of Harmony now. And I think it was at least, I'm going to say 10, 15 years ago, that once I had accumulated multiple records, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, great-grandfather, their children, all of them were buried at Harmony Cemetery, the old Harmony Cemetery. The earliest one I think I have is from 1909. And of course, the latest one would be close to when they closed. So I nicely took my records over to the New Harmony in hopes of finding out where they were so that I could honor them and I could go back and share this information with my siblings to let them know we need to have some kind of ceremony. Do you know their grandmother and great-grand, all of them are over there. I was so excited. So I went over to New Harmony and I took my records, and the young lady that took the information from me, she was so helpful. She said, well, it's going to take me a while, but I will bring you back and I'll tell you, where they're located. So she did. She brought me back my records and she told me the exact locations of where they were. But then she quietly said to me, but there are no headstones. And I said, no headstones. So I'm just mumbling this to myself as I'm leaving the building to go and ride around to the different locations that she gave me. And sure enough, I saw no headstone. I barely could even read the little number and lot number and site number that they have down on the ground. So I became so upset that I got in my car. I had to sit there and collect my thoughts. And I just cried because I said to myself, nobody had enough money to get a headstone? That's what I thought. I didn't think that it was something done in a different way. I just thought we just didn't. And then I would think about my great-grandfather. I said, well, he was a contractor. He owned his first home in 1882. He owned a second home in like 1928. He helped start the school of North Brentwood. This was somebody that I certainly would think he would have been honored and have a gravestone, because that marker to me is so important. Because even though you may have a death certificate or you may have a memory of that person, when you look at that grave and you see that headstone, that's the true physical evidence that this person existed, he lived, and we cared about him, people loved him. And you didn't have that. I didn't have that at that time, I think I had at least 20 relatives that were buried in Harmony, and nobody had a headstone. So that's what kind of started me on this journey, not knowing the history of Harmony. But then when I started looking at it, I started seeing different things, newspaper articles and different things where things happened. And of course, when the Son started the program, my name came up because of Reverend Fowler, who is a distant cousin of mine, and he knew how connected my family was to Harmony Cemetery. So he said, well, you got to bring Violetta, and she does a lot of research, and I'm sure she can help us with this. So that's really how I became involved with it.
Amazing. And at what point did you realize that there were stones, and they were removed, and they were not taken to where the bodies were relocated?
It was really when the initial stuff hit the fan with the Virginia discovery. I did not know until then. Even though some of the newspaper articles alluded that something went wrong, but it didn't go into the details that we found out once we discovered those stones that had washed up in Virginia. So from that, and then I was still amazed at the number of stones that it was. And you know, what I feel is it isn't just one person that did this. It's so many hands that touched this that could have taken this in a different direction, and they did not. So everybody first needs to acknowledge the wrongdoing, and so that we can move forward and do something to honor these people.
Absolutely. And now that some of these stones are being removed from the river and rediscovered, do you have hopes that perhaps some of your family stones will emerge? And would that be something that you would like to see happen?
I definitely would like to see that. Every time I hear of more stones that have been discovered, I keep looking. And one of the events that they had, I went and I took my grandchildren, and they are 17 and 13 now. And I've shared with them different things that I've discovered through my genealogy, and I've piqued their interest a lot. So I'm very thankful for that. But I don't think they understood what I was telling them about the headstones and that piece of it. So when we went to the program and they saw those headstones that they had found laying out on the ground, they just became, I could just see a light bulb going on. They said, whoa. And they were like, why aren't they with the graves? What happened? And then they were carefully looking to, because they knew the family names, so they were carefully looking to see if they saw any Sharps, Reds, Browns. There's a whole lot of different names. But so far I have not seen any of them. And I may not, but that doesn't change the fact that I want them all to be recognized. So if I can only hope for their name to be on a memorial wall or whatever that we choose to do, I will appreciate that.
Yeah, great. And anything else you want to say in general, just about this type of research and why it's important, or anything else you'd like to see come of this project?
I'm hoping to see a final result in the actual monument being put there. At some time, I kind of wish that I could create a headstone for some of the individuals in my family. I don't know if that's something that we could pull together as a family and do. But it's important, and people need to realize there are just so many things. I'm involved with so many different projects where unimaginable things have happened. You know, you see communities destroyed through urban renewal and other reasons. And the first thing, in order to get anything done, is to acknowledge what was done. You know, it's not so much about who did it or any of that. Just acknowledge what was done, and then find some way to resolve. Not, you can't correct it, but at least you can honor those people that were removed or displaced through that process. But as far as harmony is concerned, I just think that I know it's going to be a job to do it, because you want to acknowledge all of them that were there from the beginning of Harmony to 1950. And you also want something other than just their name. You want to hear a little story about them. You want to have an obituary. Some of the documentation I have there, especially with my great-great-grandmother, her name was Nellie Brown Red. And she was the one person that my father opened up and talked about. Everybody else, it was a little sketchy. You had to really work at him. Daddy, well, tell me more about your father. He didn't want to talk about that, but he would talk about his grandmother and say how he remembers taking naps with her and how she would read to him and the stories that she would tell. And fast forward to when I finally find her death record, and she died in 1925, buried at Harmony. And when I read the obituaries that they left for her, they not only said who she was and who was left behind, naming the children, surviving children and everything, but at the end they wrote a poem. And when I read that poem, it made me think, my God, she was a really caring, nurturing woman, because the whole little poem was you could just feel her nurturing the kids. And then knowing the story that my dad had told about her, I said, she must have been like a nurse. Then another instance is in the book that the Plumbers wrote, the diaries, Out of the Depths. They talk about Nellie Brown Red. And they talked about her in the sense that one of the Plummer children, husband died suddenly, and she was left with 4 or 5 kids. I don't remember how many. And in the diary, she writes that if it was not for the care of Nellie Brown Red, who actually she was I think she was the sister of the partner that had died, Preston Brown. And when I read that, I said, oh my goodness, she must have been like a nurse. Maybe she was a midwife or something. But, you know, the whole article was talking about how she cared for her nieces. They would have been her nieces and nephews at the time. And I just, that was just great to hear. And that's why I think harmony is so important. It doesn't matter what stature in life you were, and let's face it, Harmony was a premier cemetery, and it had wonderful people of high stature and prominence and what have you, but it also had everyday people there because it was a choice for the Reds to bury people at Harmony, and they even continued to do it after the cemetery moved to the new Harmony, which says to me they did not know. I can't imagine them continuing to bury their family members someplace where the headstones were treated in such a way. And maybe even that whole process of moving those graves to the new location. So I just want everybody to get that recognition and that honor, no matter who their family member was. And I want people to know about them. And that's the gift that I feel that I can give to my children and grandchildren and children to come.
Beautiful. Fantastic. All right.